Morning, I'm Danny Cross. I'm Director, Head of Data Center Delivery at Winvic Construction. For those of you who may not know us, Winvic was formed in 2001, so this is our 25-year anniversary. We've built a strong reputation as a leading UK contractor across three core sectors: industrial and logistics, civils and infrastructure, and multi-room. Towards the end of last year, we formally announced the launch of our fourth sector, data centers, marking a significant step in expanding our offering in the UK data center construction market. It's great to see so many people here today. I'd like to personally welcome you all to the Winvic Pavilion for today's session. Beyond power, what determines data center viability? This is a topic that's becoming increasingly critical as the sector continues to evolve at pace, and I'm sure we're in for a really insightful discussion. Before I hand over to our panel chair, Karen, from ING Media, who will provide a further introduction to today's session, I would like to promote our charity that Winvic and the partners have decided to go with this year. We'll be raising funds for the Leeds Children's Charity at Lynham Farm through our Golden Wellies campaign, which you'll see outside. Scan a QR code and any donations will be greatly appreciated. So thank you for joining us today and hope you enjoy the discussion.
Thank you, Danny. As Danny said, I'm Karen Fletcher from the Sectorscope. I'm the editor of the Sectorscope magazine. As he also mentioned, our discussion today is going to avoid the topic of power and data centres, if we possibly can. So some of you may be relieved to hear that. What we really want to look at is some of the challenges that the sector has behind that, because sometimes the issue of power can disguise other things. So we want to look at how the industry can respond to these pressures and whether things like we need further support, policy alignment, planning, and so on. So I want to ask our panel if they could just quickly introduce themselves.
Yeah, Louisa Cuccio, Ryder Levitt Bucknell, partner in advanced tech and data centers.
Good morning, everyone. Rennie Dalrymple from Ridge & Partners. I'm in charge of our data center work across the UK and Europe.
Hi everyone, Andrew Pillsworth, Managing Director for Data Centres at Segro. We own and run the Slough Trading Estate, Europe's largest data centre hub, and I manage our data centre business at Segro.
We are a data centre business. I'm Emma Fryer from CyrusOne. We develop and operate data centres. I'm Public Policy Director for Europe.
Thank you very much. Wonderful to have you all here. I want to really start with you, Emma, at the end there. We see a lot of news in the UK now about data centres being built in areas and how people are responding to those plans is becoming, perhaps there's a bit more friction with locals now. And I wonder if you could, as a business which is developing these globally, address that. How important is it to get public buy-in to these projects now?
I think it's really important, but at different levels. So firstly, there's a central government. At the moment, we've got a very supportive central government for data centre development. You've got local government where you actually need to understand what they're trying to achieve locally. But I think in terms of host community engagement, the people who are actually going to be the neighbours to this, who it's going to affect on a daily basis, those are people who it's really important to work with, to educate, to understand their needs. So I think what's happened, in the States is that there has been a huge backlash, local backlash. We haven't seen it nearly as much in Europe, but I think that is because actually we're obliged through, more thorough and sensible planning to do local needs assessments, part of the planning process. So to understand, and work with the authority to see what needs to be delivered through, for instance, the 106. Not those processes don't happen everywhere. And I think what's been really interesting in the States is the speed with which attitudes have changed in the States. And previously, data centres have sort of, always had a social licence to operate. And now they absolutely don't have a social licence to operate. Whereas in Europe, they've never had a social licence to operate. We have to earn it. And I think there's a lot of things that we can do at a local level. I'd say there's aesthetics. If you're, data centres are now coming into visibility, as we know, in the sense they're not always in trading estates or industrial parks or hidden away. They're now becoming visible in public domain. So if you're building a data centre in a semi-rural location, or you're building one in a urban, high-density residential. You have to do things with the aesthetics. You've got to think about the design. You can't really get away with a 4-storey grey box there. There's plenty of places you can, but you can't there. You have to think about that aesthetically. You've got to think about amenity. You've got to think about what's in it for people. And I think we do have a community engagement strategy at CyrusOne for Europe, but if I had a strapline for that, it is, having been on the other side of projects that I did not like as a local resident, I would say the key thing is to give local people a sense of agency in your project, both all the way through development, from concept to build, and then also you need to stick around. And you need to do that yourself. You need to turn up yourself as an employee of the company and engage. Okay. And actually, I've done it for CyrusOne on our 2 London sites, and it's been one of the most rewarding experiences I've had, and the amount we've learned has been amazing. So I'd say agency for me is the key thing. Lots of other things, but agency is the underlying thing.
Interesting. Andrew, I mean, we've spoken about sort of, getting buy-in from local people around there. What about, where, and I think Emma touched on this, where data centres are being built? How is that sort of, are we putting them in the right places? Are we understanding, obviously, there are some areas like Slough where they've always been, but now, we don't have space everywhere. How are those decisions being made?
Well, I can just talk, just to build on what Emma was saying, talking to our own book, we are an industrial developer, have been for a long time, obviously been building data centres on the Slough trading estate for a long time, but actually over the last few years we've been quietly building up a very big bank of powered land suitable for data centres. So looking at location, and we've been able to do that actually by scouring our own portfolio. So SEGRO has £21 billion of assets under management, and I can see there's some of my industrial colleagues in the audience, but basically we started out by exercise by saying data centres create so much value, everything in our portfolio is in play to identify as a data centre location, and then you filter it down to say, is it going to work? I know we're not talking about power.
And you had to mention it, didn't you?
That is,
you had to go there
first.
I just couldn't help it. But that's one of the criteria. So, you start to filter that down in the Venn diagram. Yeah. By no means, to any of my colleagues in the audience, relax. It's not going to be all of our portfolio. Then you filter that down and say there are some locations where you're simply not going to be able to get the power in the time frame. Planning that Emma's talked about is another key constituent. Are you going to be able to get planning for data? And then most critically, is it in a location where we feel there is going to be strong demand for data centres? Because we can talk about power and planning, but ultimately, like all development, if you don't have a customer willing to take that on terms that are going to work for both parties, you can talk about planning and power and all the other things you're talking about as much as you like. Like all parts of real estate, ultimately this is going to be successful if you've got a customer. So we scoured our whole land bank, both in the UK and continental Europe, and we've now got a powered land bank of 2.5 gigawatts split across continental Europe and the UK, with a significant chunk of that in London and also in Slough, having applied that criteria. So, and that's one of Europe's largest powered land banks. So simply for me, I have a fantastic powered land bank. That's probably a 10-year development program to develop all of that out. And so for me, we've applied those criteria. So we're not very actively searching for more land. And I just to build on the point Emma made, then in those locations, having selected that site and got that development, just to reiterate everything Emma said, the planning process, and we've recently been through it. We've got a site at Park Royal in northwest London. Been through the planning process, and anyone that's on my previous panel would say actually that the planning process gets bad rap. If you really engage in the way Emma's described and you really treat it as a partnership between yourself and the local community, it can actually be very constructive. We worked with the OPDC there, and it was it's a really good process, and actually it started concurrently with the planning process for my garage at home. And the £1 billion data centre, my garage, obviously the capex is a little bit less than that. The £1 billion data centre, that was determined in 7 months, and the garage was 12 months. So that shows you that actually if you really engage in the right way with the local community, the local planning authority, that's obviously in London, so the GLA as well, you can actually, it can get a bad rap, you can actually have a really constructive process and actually get through the planning process quite fast. But it's just really important, not only the planning, it's also, we have a community fund there over and above, it's engaged, yes, the planning process, but also really actively engaging with the local community. We formed a digital skills fund over and above the planning process.
Interesting, we talking about London and Slough and so on. Of course, the UK government, having declared data centres critical infrastructure, has set aside certain areas around the country where they sort of, saying this is going to be AI infrastructure here. I mean, does that help? I mean, you've spoken about location or not, about that. Is that helpful? I mean, I think, we have these AI ambitions. How is that playing out locally? I think Rennie, you had thoughts on that area. Polite.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, as Emma was saying, I think we have a favourable government in relation to data centre development. I think there's something like 5 AI zones at the moment, and I think they want to sort of try and extend that to 10. So clearly some way to go on that. I think once you get into the nitty gritty, it's a slightly different story in relation to, there's a cover story around AI zones, but the planning process, I mean, that's great work to get through one of those in sort of 7 months, but there is a lot of work that goes into those, and there's been quite a bit of planning legislation that's changed at the back end of last year, and there's more development to come on that this year. And there's lots of, let's abandon the Town and Country Planning Act and let's go down the DCO, Development Consent Order route. Let's look at LDOs. There's still a tremendous amount of work that goes into putting those type of applications together. So I know people are saying, let's fast track it, but the reality is I can't see much fast tracking going on at the moment. Add in sort of something that's sort of relatively new to the UK in terms of self-generation, to get over those voids that we're not allowed to talk about in terms of grid availability. They add another complexion or an added layer of complexity to the planning process in terms of, not always mini, but sort of small power stations sitting alongside the main data center facility. So it's still a lot of work to navigate.
Emma, you're raising your eyebrows.
Oh, sorry, I'm not a fan of the air growth zones. We're developer operators, so we will be in wherever we are. We will be there for 25 years. So once we've built a data center, we then operate it on site. I think it's created a sort of furore, a lot of hot air, but not much action. And I think the problem is that the government hasn't specified what the criteria are for those growth zones. And also, they haven't said when they're going to stop announcing them. So one of the sort of perverse outcomes we've seen is this absolutely colossal new ballooning of the connection demand queue, which is now 126 gigawatts, almost none of which are actually genuine data center projects because they're people trying to upgrade the value of their land. Once you get hard land, then it's worth a lot more. And we're also now seeing the same with people asking for gas connections. So although, wanting to power, that is very problematic in the sense that it's then obscured the landscape. And also, I think government is starting to recognise it, because it's great having a positive government, but it would have been nice if they talked to the industry a bit more about this first. What they was, if they want the UK to be a centre of excellence for AI, then they need to work out what kind of AI the UK is suitable to be a centre of excellence for. The AI will never, under current circumstances, be a centre of excellence for location agnostic, large training workloads, because those are location agnostic and they're energy intensive. So they're going to go to where energy is 6 pence a kilowatt hour, which is not anywhere in the UK unless you did some very, very significant sort of regulatory reform on, direct wire and dealing with curtailment and that kind of stuff. So that will not happen. There is a huge market, we think, of growth for what we call inference. So when the model is trained, then you actually deploy it. At the moment, we're seeing a lot of AI actually be delivered through cloud as curated services. So we're actually seeing increased demand for the traditional cloud clusters as opposed to increase. We're not, as a company, seeing any demand in the AI growth zones from customers, large-scale customers. But we are seeing there are patches of demand, and we think that over time people will work out how they're monetizing the AI, and then they'll work out what the actual what the locational attributes are. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we're there yet. I don't think people are quite well. So I think government's getting mixed message from the industry. They're getting different messages from the neoclouds than they are from us. But all I can say is we are driven by customer demand. We're not going to spend £1 billion anywhere unless we know someone's going to occupy that.
Yeah.
So I think that's why I'm sceptical of the AI growth zones, and I totally understand why any government or any policy maker would want to try and control the distribution of data centres, because data centres inject FDI into an economy faster than anything else because of the speed of build. I mean, would you agree with that?
Totally agree.
Yeah. So it is an incredibly attractive thing to try and spread that around. But and you can think that people think we're all insane because we keep buying land in Slough, and the most expensive land probably in the world, I would imagine by now, and going where there's loads of data centres already, and where probably everybody hates us, and where there's no power, but we still go there, and there must be a reason, or we are mad or stupid. But there is a reason, and it's where the market is driving us.
Yeah, I must admit, I haven't done a recent comparison with the Valley of Land in Slough versus Tokyo residential, but not sure whether we're quite up there yet. But just to add to that, if I can, I totally agree. I think the problem for me is that with the AI growth zones, the interjection of the government and the support, and particularly the designation of data centres as critical national infrastructure, is super helpful and incredibly welcome. But at its best, government policy is for it to be demand-led, which would lead you to actually supporting areas. And of course, I would say this because we own the Slough trading estate, like, for example, Slough, Europe's biggest data centre cluster and the second biggest in the world as an AI growth zone, rather than supply-led. I think we all understand why you'd want to put it in those locations. But as I said right up front, ultimately, like all sectors, data centres, ultimately the most important thing is the end customer and catering to where the customers want to be. Now, over time, I'm sure that won't just be in areas like London and Slough. I totally agree with Emma. But right now, for very good reason, whether it's latency or, I think it's often underestimated the clustering effect with data centres. There's a reason they're in clusters, because they share, put very simply, and I'm not an engineer, they share infrastructure, and they talk to each other, and those clusters tend to be close to the population centres and the end users, and that will be largely, a lot of the demand will come from enterprise going forward, businesses, and that's why they are where they are, and that's where the demand is. So it would have been, I agree with Emma in terms of the location.
But we have to take some steps forward, and I totally get the large language model that's geography agnostic, but as I say, if we're going to do anything in the AI space, that sort of neo cloud, which is lots of AI customers together in one facility, rather than public cloud, which tends to have one large operator, then I think you have to make some inroads. And no disrespect to London is the sort of certainly the largest cloud market in Europe by far. We do have to start preparing other locations in the UK to house data center development. But if we're going to sort of achieve some of the things we want to in terms of the digital infrastructure that's going to drive UK PLC going forward. But
I mean, moving on slightly from the sort of the planning end of things and looking at the actual sort of delivery aspect of data centers, getting these projects out of the ground, once they're underway, where are we in the construction industry in terms of the skills and the numbers of people? Danny, what are your thoughts around that?
You moved the questions around, haven't you? I think the UK construction market is quite strong, but the data centres, they rely on a lot of the heavy MEP integration and commissioning skills, and that talent pool is limited and are being chased by multiple large-scale data centre projects at once. And as a result of that, the contractors and specialists prioritise the schemes that have the power, own the sites, clearly funded and actively progressing, and built around realistic programmes. I think that's a key thing for us. And certain projects quickly struggle to attract the right calibre of delivery teams, and we're finding what I found in terms of the the projects that we've been tendering and involved in and tracking is some of them aren't. It's not quite clear in terms of where they're at. So the engagement of the contractors at the right time is either oversubscribed or happening too early. There tends to be a lot of people chasing the same thing, and some of them are probably in the know a bit more and prioritising the ones that are the priority projects. So I don't think there's that much of an issue in terms of skill shortage. It's about the concentration of the GCs and the supply chain that are working on these projects at the same time. And then the other problems that we're seeing, and this is during the tender process as well, is the unrealistic programs. And I think with the unrealistic programs that are being, we're the ones that are ultimately delivering that, say the final stage, but in terms of the panel people here, the contractor is the one that's got to be delivering that.
Yeah.
We're seeing a lot of onus put back on the clients in terms of OFCI, long lead-in items, the actual power on dates, and if those things aren't achieved, then the whole project is at risk. And the way to overcome that is the strategic partnerships, early engagement, and working with the GCs as a strategic partner, not just a sort of transactional process, really.
Yeah. Andrew, what are you had some thoughts on skills around the sector as well that I think are sort of relate to getting these projects up and running?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, but on a slightly different angle. And actually, I was on on a few panels here. I was on another panel yesterday where this came up, and there's a lady from AWS next to me who was really passionate about this. So particularly for us, is not only looking at the skills, obviously, as Danny describes, to deliver the data center, but also the skills to operate the data centers effectively once they're built, and even more importantly, because ultimately, it's the same with all our buildings. We love buildings, whether they're grey boxes or very attractive facades for data centers. But the exciting thing in all our buildings we deliver across industrial, whether it's urban, whether it's logistics, or whether it's, in my bit of the business, data centers, is what happens inside the building. And in the case of data centers, that is going to genuinely, whether they're in London, the southeast, or elsewhere, it's going to power the modern economy. And whether that's cloud or whether that's AI, and actually the area of skills and the one we focus on in our community programs is digital skills more widely, with a particular focus on the skills needed to operate the industries that the data centers will facilitate. And that is absolutely critical. If the UK is going to be a winner in the modern digital economy, and it is happening with both cloud and AI, then as a country we've got to have the digital skills. And so, I can say as an industry, take Park Royal, we've got a scheme there where we've put a multi-million-pound digital skills fund in to specifically target school children and unemployed people, with an aim of targeting 2,500 people to put really concrete programs in to train and educate those two specific groups with digital skills, but with a focus not just on operating the data center, as I say, much wider than that, actually the skills to operate the industries that will be facilitated. Because there is a real danger if we don't do that, and do that on a big scale. It needs the whole industry to lean into that actually we can build all these data centers. You've got to have the skills ultimately to operate the industries that they facilitate.
Yeah. It's interesting you're talking there about taking a very long-term view of the whole sector and about your business. And I sort of wanted to come to Louisa on this, because you were talking about research and a report that RLB has done on sort of looking at sort of taking an integrated approach to getting these things delivered, and sort of looking at particularly project teams and so on. What's the thinking on that? What have you discovered?
Definitely that we need to embrace collaboration as a delivery tool, and not just a phrase that we use to make us sound like we're trying to be positive with one another. The more that you can actually create genuine partnerships, whether that's through a designated framework or master services agreement, that actually can unlock these projects faster. But it's about looking at that forward commitment and giving that commitment to the market, so that it becomes about when, not if. And that is a key thing, I think, kind of touching on some of the points that you mentioned, Danny. Are these projects actually going to happen? How much do we commit to this process? Even when you look at different procurement models, in terms of how much can we actually collaborate? How well do we truly embrace what these different procurement models means? We're constantly seeing a changing landscape, multi-stage, GMP, PMC, or an integrated project delivery model. But I can guarantee almost if I asked everyone in this room, you would have a slightly different definition of what that procurement model meant, because of every project that you've worked on, someone has interpreted that slightly differently. So we're not speaking the same language, even though we're using the same words. And when it actually comes time to going through that model, we're not really embracing what it means to actually go down that route. So are we truly, like say, as a client, are you truly retaining the risk that you should be retaining under that model? And, are the contractors actually using the pain gain mechanisms, or are we actually incentivizing the market? Are these incentivization mechanisms just there because it sounds like we're trying to be positive and collaborative? But, if they're not actually going to work, if there's no genuine incentive there to try to achieve program dates or better your cost, then the contractors are just going to price that risk in anyway, because they know that they're not really going to get the incentivization at the end. So you're just really undoing the point of what you're trying to create if you don't actually have that open dialogue, if we're not all on the same pages with what we're working towards, what are the KPIs, here is a genuine incentivization, here's genuinely how we can collaborate on this.
Yeah.
I think just to add on the workload and that visibility, I mean, not everyone gives that visibility for a multitude of reasons, but it's vitally important for us as a contractor to have that visibility, because if a project gets put back 6 months, 12 months, the biggest impact that has are on the end delivery partners, i.e. the contractors. We used to get, and I'm talking from other sectors as well, in a previous role, I used to get a call on a Friday for a tender on a Monday, and some people actually think you've got a load of people sitting on a shelf ready to go, and that's just not the case. That forward planning, that visibility of the workload, and whether it's in competition, I don't think the procurement, the form of tenders really makes that much of a difference, because we're all familiar with the different formats. It's having that certainty and understanding when these projects are coming, so we can allocate the resource to it, plan the workload effectively, and prioritize what we want to be doing for the clients we want to be working with at the right time. And with our supply chain partners, we're not just looking at them as supply chain partners in the subcontract element. We're looking at partnerships and working with the right people. I'm talking primarily MEP, where you've got the vast amount of the project is MEP led. If you're working collaboratively with an MEP partner, as opposed to going out to 3 or 4 in the market, that just gets saturated because they're doing the same for other GCs. That strategic partnership, the early engagement, and the transparency with the workload is going to help that process and make sure those projects are less at risk to not succeed.
Yeah. Just to throw in an extra. Sorry, I was going to say, Rennie.
No, I mean, just sort of sitting in the middle of working with in terms of what we probably do in terms of project management, cost consultancy, project advisory services. Sometimes there just isn't that transparency, and as we've mentioned a couple of times, it's the end customers that drive these projects, then the investors, financiers, clients, and so there's a lot of moving parts. I do agree with Danny in terms of and Louisa in terms of, I think there should be an opportunity to take a bit of a step back from some of this, to look at how we can sort of deploy things a little bit more strategically. But sometimes there just isn't the transparency. And I'm not talking about a tender on a Friday and a Monday. That just sounds, for bad old days, poor practice. But there is, as I say, the customers drive the project, and I think risk placement's really key, because I think that some, not certainly maybe clients on the panel, but some still hold on to a lot of information, don't really sort of share what the real risks are, which I think might be your point there, and that gets put on the supply chain in a unfavourable way, and then the projects still don't get delivered on time, and
That's interesting. Just out of interest, why are they holding that information back? Is that just that they would regard that as
Probably a bit of risk
business?
mitigation
Okay.
on the sort of client side. Yeah.
I feel like that dreaded NDA as well.
Yeah.
Is that, we all know what's happening in the market. We all know what is, kind of coming and what we're working on, but we can't actually say it. We can't talk about it. We can't share lessons learned. So we all just everything kind of stays like this. And then you go into the next project and it's a bit of, I'll show you mine if you show me yours. But, even as a consultant, we're working with other partners. Are we sharing that with other, clients and developers and making sure that you're kind of sharing that? So it's almost like I understand the reason for it, particularly with a lot of the points that Emma and Andrew are talking about, but it almost can be an undoing to what's happening in our sector to actually genuinely drive away these challenges and progress faster.
One of the I had a conversation recently with a client who will remain nameless, and we were involved in a tender where it was quite strong competition in terms of numbers and quality of other GCs, and it's worse to me where we just don't want to waste GC's time, and it was music to my ears in terms of great, we want to give you that visibility, and we want to make sure that we're aligning our partnership with our GCs and allocating the right projects to the right people as well at the right time.
Yeah.
So that's positive.
Yeah. I mean, Emma, just to sort of come back to you as someone who's, delivering these buildings at scale across the world, where do you stand on transparency and, working with partners that way? I mean, is it such a secretive industry? Or
I don't. I mean, we work pretty closely with our GCs. It's very much a cascade. So, but I don't know because I don't run the construction side of the business at all. They keep me well clear of that. I can't imagine I'd
you
add
probably
much
talk
value.
too much. That's like, you tell them everything. Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. What about you, Andrew? What's your?
Well, I unfortunately I haven't got that get out. I am responsible for construction, and I'd say on DCs today. So we've got a big DC portfolio, but today they have been shells. So obviously we have an awful lot of experience in delivering shells with our general contractors, and should say, I ran our UK logistics business for 5 years, delivering a lot of buildings, including actually quite a lot with Winvic. And, our general principle when we are delivering shells is, just picking up on what Danny said, you've got to be open and transparent, because ultimately it gets you the best result. And to your point on tenders, actually, sometimes we would tender contracts, we generally would, but sometimes we don't. And we've got some examples where you only go through a tender. For me, you only go through a tender if you are genuinely you genuinely intend that you might appoint any of those contractors, because otherwise it's sort of part of the contract. You definitely don't, to Danny's point, want to waste anybody's time. And there is nothing more frustrating from a contractor on the other side than going through a tender where the end position is predetermined. So if you do want to work with a particular contractor for whatever reason, it's much better you just have the faith to have, and the trust. It's a partnership at the end of the day to negotiate and be trusting that contractor won't disclose anything you don't want them to, and won't turn you over on the price because you haven't got the threat of a tender. So it'll be part of the journey for us. And actually I've just got a new recruit into my team to head up my technical function that's joined us from Global Switch, because as I say, we've got loads of experience on delivering the shells, but with our partners at Pure, it'll be the first time at our Park Royal development that we've gone up the curve to actually deliver the MEP. So as part of that, although we have loads of experience, say, in delivering shells, I have brought someone into my team from a DC operator, and actually his name's Anthony Burke. He worked at Global Switch for a number of years, and before that worked for a contractor delivering data centers. So I have quite deliberately brought into my team someone with direct experience on the client side and contractor of delivering that MEP. So we've got the right skills in our team to supplement what we've already got on the shelves.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. I did want to just turn slightly away, sort of looking at the other end of these projects, and talk about investor profiles on this, particularly with you, Rennie. I think you and I were chatting earlier about different types of investor coming into the sector, and thereby sort of increasing this focus on certainty of outcomes?
Yeah, I mean, it's I guess as things have matured, and maybe if we kind of concentrate on the UK, I guess things 10 years out, 5 years out, very much sort of alternative asset class. So in many ways, a lot of investors were prepared to be sort of more entrepreneurial. So you could, in those days, kind of, that we kind of sometimes talk, build it and they will come. So you could be less specific about location because there was no physical portfolio of data centers. But as Emma was saying earlier, that's radically changed, so that as I say, if you don't have a site that's customer that can translate to a customer requirement, then you're not going to get funders, you're not going to get investors looking at that. I think funding in relation to public cloud, and when I keep talking about that again, it's large scale AWS, Microsoft taking over sort of large campuses is pretty well established. I think some of the exciting things and models that will evolve, going back to some aspects about self-generation. So you've got sort of utility product on the campus. How does that get funded? And then some of the we mentioned earlier, sort of neo cloud, sort of early generation AI stuff. Again, there's some interesting aspects about potentially equipment, IT obsolescence. So the workloads in those data centers could be potentially different. We're very much at the beginning of that journey. So again, looking at that from a funding perspective, and I think we're going to see funds now look at how do we place the sort of construction development risk, land risk, power in one vehicle, and then look at maturing that into an operating vehicle, and looking at those two sort of things separately. So again, it's trying to look at the different sort of risk placement through that whole funding cycle as to, and these schemes require a lot of capital deployment. So getting that mix right is I think going to continue to evolve.
Yeah. Louisa, I just wanted to come back to you talking, this need for transparency and collaborative approaches. Are there examples of how it can work? Are there good? Are there sort of things that you've seen that you've looked and said, that's a process that actually does make it happen?
Yeah, I think standardization of design is something that we're seeing kind of evolve more and more, and gives that kind of certainty, particularly when you're looking at that collaboration at developing a trusted supply chain and partnership, is being able to have, it's not exactly kind of copy and repeat, but being able to have that model to say, here is what 80% of what we're delivering looks like, which means that you can genuinely implement lessons learned, you can get speed to market a lot quicker. And listening to the market and actually adapting to that local market, particularly as you move across into Europe. What we've seen not work well is where you take a model that works, tried and tested in the UK, and you try to put that somewhere in Europe, and you're not actually engaging with the market. They don't understand what you want to deliver. They don't understand your procurement model, your contracts, and what you're trying to achieve. And you just get a breakdown in that delivery. But where we've seen customers go into new regions and truly embrace and engage with the local market, engage with the local supply chain, what do their contracts look like? How does that work throughout their full supply chain? What is the risk that they like to take versus like to transfer? How does that work with what the business is delivering? Do these standardized designs work in that region? We see a lot more success when you go into those markets and actually listen to them. Kind of, dare I say, kind of being slightly vulnerable in terms of, we know what we're doing in, how to build and deliver and operate a data center. We don't know how to do it exactly in this market. Help us help you.
Yeah.
Which we definitely see, some wins, particularly as you move across Europe and you move into some less established markets. That has definitely been the benefit that we see comes from that.
Yeah.
But we're working on one scheme in Germany at the moment for a particular customer, and their generic requirements have been updated twice in the time that we've actually kind of just done the pre-development work. So you've got something, customer requirements And yeah, that's to cope clearly with a changing IT compute that they're envisaging in this data center. But then that translates into the physical infrastructure. So the building, the size it is, how the floor to ceiling heights changing quite substantially. And then that feeds back into what have we gone to consult with the local planners on. Now the building needs to be taller and the chimneys are higher. And suddenly you're into this sort of very iterative process. Again, then difficult to translate through to the supply chain. So I think there's an element of, that standardization, and there's some, I think, pragmatism all round, and some of the sort of public cloud, easy for me to say, sort of kind of maybe need to look at some of their SOQs that they put out and say these are all absolute. As I say, you've delivered a lot of shells very successfully, and they're still full of data centers, but if you start from scratch, they're like, we must have this, and these are not negotiable, which is clearly not the case. So, but it just slows, as Louise is saying, just slows or can slow the whole process down.
What was quite interesting from RLB's DC Trends report earlier in the year was, I think it was over 60% of respondents said that standardization in design would improve speed to market, yet only 31% that they either had or actively working towards a standardized design. So there's such a disparity between, even from that perspective, what is being prioritized, to your point there, Rennie.
Yeah, I can well believe it.
So that's that identifying what elements can be standardized, because it's a forever evolving design.
Absolutely, definitely, and particularly, as we, you constantly see this swing between, to your point, as the end users changing what their spec is, which means that the build needs to change to modify to that. Cloud AI, we still haven't quite decided on which way we're going as of right now. So exactly that is that we can't, not having those things actually ironed out means it's harder for the rest of that to be firmed up.
Yeah, I think from my experience and Winvic's experience in the I&L world, there's a very well-known customer that we do a lot of work for, and we build to a template, which is great. But here's the 4 million changes to that template that we want you to be. And I was sort of tasked up with looking at, what's the data center standard template, because things are evolving. There's so many different client formats of that. It's difficult to understand what that looks like.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, welcome to the world of fit out.
I think there's I think there's two aspects to that. There's definitely, even in our early stage, we're very aware there's a lot of change in terms of specs, but just focusing also before that on the planning point. I mentioned our big pipeline. We've got DC projects, quite a few of those are in Europe, and we're actively working on them. And actually, I set a criteria that we are only going to have sites in our pipeline where we've actually got our industrial and logistics teams on the ground, because we are already seeing a huge benefit, and a lot of those teams, they won't be experts in data centers, but they have expertise and all the local relationships in bringing powered land through the planning process. And that is the same process, whether it's for a data center, all the same criteria apply. Bring the community with you, understand the local planning requirements, understand the local politics and the planning authority and what is important to them. And we are already seeing an enormous benefit from actually operating in locations where you've got teams on the ground who understand, because those of you that have operated in continental Europe will know that the planning, and in fact it's more a permitting system there, is very, very different, and particularly the vital importance of local mayors in that process. And I can see that's resonated with anyone who has dealt with that. And we are seeing a real advantage, actually, just from a pure basic real estate point of view, of having teams on the ground who understand that process.
Yeah, which is this benefit of being prepared and knowing what's going on. Yeah. I know that you guys have got yet another panel to go to.
Unfortunately,
So I just wanted to ask: is anyone, lady at the front? Are we microphoning? I think we just have to speak up.
I'm a loud American. I can my name is Alita Jackson. I work for Sustainable Development Capital. I'm a power plant investor in both the UK and the US. And I want to ask the question to Emma, because you're exactly right. The US is the pitchforks. Everybody's upset. But I just noticed that was a project in Scotland. The Edinburgh Council now has a temporary ban on data centers. So that came from more of a political area, and with the politics changing, particularly in the UK, both in the recent elections for local councils and other things, as well as the government in Scotland and Holyrood. Do you see some headwinds coming in the UK with some of the electoral things happening?
Yes, in a word. So in a sense, we've had a lot of, in a sense, when you have the central government policy aligned with what local government is, then you will have fewer headwinds. And now that we've got a number of authorities that aren't under any direct control, I think, and a mixture, and also wins in areas that may be less friendly to data centres, that may well be the case. Having said that, I think the central government control isn't everything. I'm not familiar with the circumstances around, because it's interesting that in Newcastle, if you want to build a data centre, you literally get a marching band. And that is, so it's a sense that it seems to be quite highly localised. And I'm not familiar with that specific project or why it derailed in that way or why they put a moratorium on it. I don't know. I'm surprised because actually Edinburgh is north of the B6 constraint, in terms of power. So the power in the UK is like a kind of, egg timer, has to get through those two things at the middle, and there's not enough power to go around in the south, and there's too much power to go around in the north. But so I can't comment on that specific project. Perhaps other people can. So I think yes, but I also think that improvements have been made in planning, and I think also the sector is learning quite fast. I would have said that within the sector itself, the emphasis on local engagement now within the sector has transformed. And I've judged for years I've judged community engagement for certain awards, and the quality of the entries is completely unrecognisable now compared to what it was maybe 7 or 8 years ago. So I think the industry's woken up to this to an extent. I think there's a lot more understanding that, there's a sense in original data thinks, well, we're not oil and gas, we're not chemical, we're not mining. Why would people not like us? And there are reasons why people not like us. Firstly, because we stick up a great big wall and loads of cameras, and everyone assumes we're making death rays. But so there are things, if you don't understand what's going in, so there's a huge amount of so we need to be forming a social contract, which we don't have. So I think that is in its embryonic stages. So I do think the industry's water. Sorry, long answer to a short question. Yes was the answer, but yeah, it depends.
That's interesting. Any other questions? Feel free to shout.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm Chloe Benson with Ramble. Given the extent of change that designs going forward and the speed at which they are changing, is there anything you'd like to see in the planning system that can facilitate that change? Given that we are seeing multiple applications coming through on the same site to account for design changes that are being made as you move from outline to detail, and in some cases, several weeks of that process is speed. Is there any sort of approaches that you'd like to see the government adopt to try to reduce those time frames, help potentially capture that flexibility, or limit how much time and money can be wasted just using that process to get to the design you need?
Great question. Section 73. Oh my God.
Yeah. Back to the beginning again.
Yeah.
I think, I don't know if I'd maybe go first a little bit. I mean, what we've tried to sort of help clients do on a couple of projects, central West London, not far from Slough, is establish a kind of design code, which has been very useful and gone through several design review panels, 2 meetings with the GLA, which is again quite sort of unusual. And yeah, this scheme, it's been built at height, so it is intensifying sort of the industrial use on the particular site, which is within policy. I think generally the outline process is able to cope with most of that. We do have to go back for each building to committee, which is again a sort of slight, if there was a frustration. So again, sort of investing in the design code should sort of help with what should have, I think, helped with that. But again, that was agreed at committee. So I think fundamentally the outline process is good, does work. I just think if we didn't have to go back so many times afterwards, would kind of help. Personally, on something we're working on right now, but
Anyone else?
No, I just agree. I think as the last thing, because we have 1 minute, unfortunately, before Emma and I have to go. I totally agree. I think it's as ever, it's flexibility. So, design codes, we've got a simplified planning zone set up on the Slough Trading Estate with it's our 4th iteration with another 8 years to run, where we have design codes in place and agreed parameters. So we have delegated authority for planning for both industrial and indeed data centres. And, just to echo Remy's point, it's just really important to put the time and effort and the legwork into making sure that the parameters and the design codes for that are as well thought out and detailed as possible, and also give as much flexibility as possible, because as we've talked about, it is evolving and it's fast moving. So it's just trying to have a system that is as flexible as possible, that either you don't need to go back to the local authority when changes happen because you've got the flexibility built in, or if you do need to, that there is a really nice, swift, efficient process. I mean, it's a great question because it is a real live issue, that one. Yeah.
Real tactical,
Yeah.
but
Okay, thank you for that.
Brilliant.
I think I'll draw it gently to a close. I think as I think people have to move on, but I think it was a great discussion, and I think if once you move behind that big pillar of power and what the issues are, there are clearly other challenges. But I think that what we're seeing now is that as the industry is in the UK is maturing, it's becoming much more interconnected and complex. And so we think we have to be a lot more collaborative about this, bringing the skills together early. The people who work in it as well sort of start thinking about that earlier on as well, and really sort of behave more as though this is quite a mature sector, although clearly there are enormous challenges with getting these buildings completed. But I think that's about it. And I'd just like to say thank you very much to the panel for that fascinating discussion.